Hi, and welcome to Allegiance to the King, the Christian Virtual Fellowship. Um, we're a small online church for distributed biblical Unitarian Christians. We know that there are many that do not have local fellowship, so provide this online and bring together biblical Unitarians from many of the continents of the world. I myself am in Scotland, but we've got people here in the States and Africa and Norway and yeah, quite a few places. So if you're looking for fellowship, please come and join us. We're on Facebook and get in contact there, and we look forward to seeing you. We have meetings on a Wednesday evening, US time, and we have a this morning meeting on a Sunday, which may work better for you if you're not in the US time zone. But please join us. We look forward to seeing you here. And yeah, thank you for watching this video. So today I have a presentation about empathy, compassion, and the fulfillment of the law. It's, yeah. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. And basically, I've realized that empathy and compassion actually help us to fulfill the commandment to love our neighbour as ourselves. And in this presentation, what we'll do is we'll explore what the Bible says around about this, and also look at some options for helping us to put these values into practice in our daily lives. Yeah. So the goal of the presentation, as it clearly says here, I don't know what screen you're looking at. You might be on a phone, so I'll read it for you. The goal of the presentation is to guide us on our journey of learning how to love our neighbours genuinely and naturally. And over time, we want to move away from feeling like we have to force ourselves to be kind, which can be the case, because at the end of the day, obedience is the number one thing, and we don't always feel like being kind. But what I'm hoping for with what I'm presenting here is that in the future, we should be getting to a point where we have more empathy and compassion, and that flows from within us, which makes loving our neighbours ourselves so much simpler. And I believe that this is how God wants us to love our neighbours, not out of blind obedience. If God wanted robots, then he would have created robots. He wants people. He's given us choice. He wants us to love our neighbours ourselves, but he wants us to do it because it's the right thing to do, not out of blind obedience. So that is what I'm hoping to tackle in this presentation. There is, as well as the biblical part, there is also a part of it that kind of delves a little bit more into the psychology side of things, and I hope that doesn't put anyone off. It's not the biggest part of the presentation, but there is some really good stuff that's come out of that side as well. So I'm not going to throw the baby out of the bathwater and say that that is not, we can't do that. I mean, the Bible doesn't tell us how to drive a car yet. Most of us have got a car and we drive it, so there are things, and we just have to be selective about and careful about what we use and what we don't use. As Paul says, everything's allowed in effect, but not everything builds us up. He doesn't, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's about what builds us up, even if there's not a strict commandment about it. If it doesn't build us up, then we should probably consider whether it's something we want to be doing or not. But that's going on to a separate topic, so let's move on. Empathy and compassion. So what are empathy and compassion? And I thought it's always always worth going back to the dictionary for a moment just to remind ourselves what the actual definition of these things are. You know, we throw words around all the time and we think we know what they mean, and so hopefully most of the time we do, but sometimes we don't, or we forget, or it's been a while since we actually remind ourselves exactly what these things mean. So I've took a visit to dictionary.com and looked at some of the words that are involved here. So I looked at the words empathy and compassion, but also sympathy, because it's part of compassion, and mercy, which is a synonym for compassion, at least at dictionary.com thesaurus. So it's worth looking at those to get a feel for what these things are. And so empathy, that's described as being the power of understanding and imaginatively entering into another person's feelings. So empathy is really, yeah, obviously understanding, but understanding somebody's feelings and almost entering their shoes and feeling what they're feeling in their situation. So that's a really, really important skill, as you'll see as we go through this presentation. And compassion, that's actually what flows from empathy and the sympathy that that may come about from when you feel how somebody else is feeling, what they're going through. So compassion is a feeling of deep sympathy, potentially sorrow for another who's stricken by misfortune, and it's accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. Now, this is at the far end of the scale. There are softer versions of that, you know. It's not all about deep sorrow for another. It's, you know, there are other points in the scale. Sorry, can I just ask everyone to go on mute? I'm getting some feedback here. Thank you very much. So there are, I mean, it's not always about the desperate end of the scale. There's also lesser versions of that, you know. We're not all instantly transformed into feeling the deepest sorrow for another. You know, it could be a much smaller thing, and it might not be the worst misfortune. And yeah, hopefully we still have a desire to help that person or alleviate that suffering, but it may not be a hugely strong desire. It's just, hopefully it's matched with the situation, you know. So I mentioned sympathy there, about feeling a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow, but sympathy there is the sharing of another's emotions, especially sorrow, anguish, pity, compassion, and an affinity or harmony, usually of feelings or interests between persons or things. So, in other words, feeling similarly to that person. And mercy is, in a way, like compassion. Your compassion is that kindness for somebody's misfortune, whereas mercy is feeling for somebody towards somebody who may have offended you or be your adversary, or so on and so forth. And you have, by the world standards, got a right to decide what happens to them, in a small way or a bigger way. You could get them in trouble in some way, or it could be worse, prison, or who knows what. And actually showing mercy, you know. That's one thing that God has obviously shown on us, in spite of how we've behaved and how we see in the Bible that people have behaved there as well, you know. So God has shown that mercy and has given us the opportunity to live and be part of the kingdom. So hopefully an opportunity that I believe that we've all grabbed, otherwise we might not be on this call. So just looking at those words and what they're saying there, you can see that compassion is not just about helping people that need help. It's also the mercy side of things. It's about having compassion towards someone who you may have a right, at least by the world standards, to not have compassion towards. So even those, you know, so that, just keep that in mind and just reflect on this, what I've said there for a moment, and if you can see the screen, if you're on a device that lets you see that, just reflect on some of those definitions there for a moment. And then we'll move on. Okay, guys, I'll move on. I can share this presentation afterwards in a PDF version if somebody wants to have a second look at this, but in the meantime, let's move on. So, what's the relationship between empathy and compassion? So, from what I've looked into and the way I feel about it is that empathy is the beginning of compassion. It allows us to imagine how someone is feeling based on what they're going through. And it also allows us to imagine how they might feel if they were going through an experience that they may not currently be going through. So, for example, we might have had an experience that others might not have had, but if we see somebody else going into a similar situation, we might have a pretty good sense of what they're going through or what they're about to go through. So empathy draws on experience, mainly how we ourselves have felt going through certain experiences, but we can also have other people's experience. If somebody has been close to us that have gone through certain things, we know we may not feel exactly how they feel, but we may have seen how they've expressed their feelings or our feelings in those times. And we can get a pretty good sense of it compared to somebody who's not even been through that. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's certainly better than nothing with regards to helping our empathy. So, yeah. So that the feeling of sympathy comes about from empathy, and that feeling helps us desire to help the person by comforting and or helping to alleviate what they, yeah. So what we mentioned before with the definition of compassion, which is repeated there again, just if anybody wants to have a second look at that. So based on that, how we can feel what others might be feeling because we've been through the same, or because somebody close to us have been through the same. Based on that, and knowing what helped us when we went through it, or what helped the person that we know who went through things, we know what helped them there. So can you see how loving our neighbors ourselves and in everything do to others as you would have them do to you, you can see the impact of what happens to others or to ourselves, and know how people feel and what helps actually to comfort or to alleviate that suffering. So you can see, hopefully, this is what I'm trying to get through, is that loving our neighbor as ourselves can actually come about from practicing empathy and compassion, and in the way I've described there about noticing these things and experiencing these things, not just through ourselves, but also through others, because thankfully we don't have to go through everything ourselves, and the less the better. But there are others, and they need comforted and they need help. So the more we know about helping to deal with those situations, the better. Because we are here to support each other in the kingdom, and we all need to get through to that finish line when Jesus returns and we're transformed and the weed is plucked from amongst the wheat, and hopefully we are left there in the kingdom with our King and our God. So, yeah, that's what I feel is the relationship between empathy and compassion. So, well, this looks quite stark, doesn't it? This grey slide, and that's deliberate. I think I've made the slides grey like this, the ones that I think are really important. Not that they aren't all important. I wouldn't include stuff that's not important, but the ones that I feel are particularly stand out. So I've mentioned empathy and compassion, but there's something else that hasn't been mentioned there, and that's understanding. You know, there's there is more than empathy, and because we can completely misinterpret things get the idea wrong about how people are feeling, what they're going through, by not really understanding. And yeah, so their empathy and compassion are deeply connected with understanding, and having empathy and compassion without understanding can be quite challenging. And I've listed some of the things there. You know, um, empathy is about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and feeling what they feel even without understanding. That could be difficult because, yeah, without understanding the context of someone's situation, it's hard to accurately imagine their feelings and experiences. Without understanding, you might misinterpret the emotions or the reasons behind their behavior, leading to misguided empathy. And empathy without understanding can be shallow, as it may not fully grasp the depth of the other person's experience. And compassion involves a desire to help alleviate someone else's suffering. Without understanding, this can be problematic because without understanding the root cause of someone else's suffering, your attempts to help might be ineffective or even harmful. Compassion without understanding can feel insincere or patronizing, as it may not address the real needs of the person. And sustaining compassion over time is harder without understanding, as you may not see the impact of your actions or feel connected to the person's ongoing journey. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that shows you why. And it's so easy to jump from, oh, you're not feeling great. Oh, I really want to help you. And all of that can be absolutely genuine. But as it says there, it can be shallow. The empathy can be shallow without actually bothering to try to understand why they're feeling like that, really. And it's easy to do, and it's hard to get right. But there are some things here that can be practiced and that we can learn to actually get good at that. Um, yeah, so that's why that slide is in grey, because I think let's not forget understanding in this equation. Fulfilling God's law, and you may get a clue to what that is if that heart presents love and those houses being connected. Could that be neighbours? So fulfilling the law by loving your neighbour as yourself. So Jesus and Paul both told us that loving our neighbour as ourselves is what the law and the prophets distilled down to. So in Matthew 7:12, Jesus said, if in everything do to others as you would have to do them do to you, for this is the law and the prophets. And Paul in Romans said, owe no one anything except to love one another, for the one who loves another has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and any other commandment are summed up in this word: love your neighbor as yourself. And here's the key part of that about what loving your neighbor is. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So, does that not suggest to us that the law is about doing no wrong to a neighbor? Yes, I think it is in big part, but there is, of course, also loving God. But there are other parts that say we love God by, we love Jesus by doing what's commanded, and we're in Jesus' love, and Jesus is in God's love. But I'm digressing a little bit. Our neighbors are not just Christians. Let's get that one flat out straight. It is everyone, including your spouse, your children, yes, even your relatives, even that relative, and your enemies. It is everyone. Um, Let us not forget that. We don't have a right to be kind to some and unkind to others. That is not what is commanded. So, here's another grey one. Sorry, guys. Do you realize what you're doing? And I'm speaking to myself here. Are you the perpetrator in someone else's story? How does your anger with others affect them, you, and those around both of you? How might stealing from your neighbour affect them and you, whether or not it becomes known to them? How does your wanting revenge or taking revenge affect them, you and those around, both of you? Or how might adultery or desire for adultery affect your relationship with your partner, your children, and the wider family, whether or not it becomes known to them? Thinking more deeply about the answers to these and other things that the Bible teaches us not to do should be really helpful in helping us to get better at loving our neighbours ourselves, you know? So, yeah, sorry, it's a strong slide, but it's a important point. And here's another important point. Sinning is serious. I mean, Jesus takes our sinning very seriously. I mean, look what he says there in Matthew 5:29-30. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. To me, that sounds pretty dramatic. I hope I don't have to go to that point. But what he says is it's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It's better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. So that's pretty stark. That's a pretty strong warning. And Paul, he again is strong, when he talks to them, the Corinthians, about the lawsuits that they were having with each other. He says, to have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you. Why not rather be wronged? Put up with that instead of that, going to that sort of length against each other. Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud, and believe us at that. Do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. Fornicators, idolaters, adulterers, male prostitutes, sodomites, thieves, the greedy, drunkards, revilers, robbers, none of these will inherit the kingdom of God. And these again are all scales. When Jesus talked about the sin, eye causes to sin, he was actually talking about even looking at somebody of the opposite sex with that kind of thinking was sin, and that's not you not even doing it in in the physical sense. So it's very serious, and yeah, I know we know this, but as part of this presentation, it's emphasized. Okay, so fulfilling the law takes empathy and compassion. So let's remind ourselves, okay, so that's a reminder again about empathy and compassion. I'll not read it out. I've covered it a couple of times, but it's being repeated for emphasis and to drum it in a little bit. But by understanding what empathy is and what compassion is, we can begin to imagine the impact of our own actions on others. So as we look back in time, we recall what others have done to us or those close to us, what that has resulted in, and how that felt to us and those around us. We may also remember how we were comforted or helped. Likewise, we know that things are still not completely healed. We know how we feel when we think about certain past experiences, and we recognize our difficulties in forgiving the perpetrators. So that's my understanding, is that that's more common in not just me feeling like that about past experiences, and forgiveness is hard. We know that we have to forgive, when we pray in the Lord's Prayer, forgive us as we forgive others, if we don't forgive others, what does that then mean for our forgiveness? So we know it's serious and it's something we have to conquer. So how might someone going through the same thing feel, and how might they be comforted and helped? So we know these things. You can see where empathy comes in with our experience there, and the compassion for wanting to help others that have been through or going through what we've been through, and knowing how things have affected you in this. Would you deliberately do the same to others? I hope not, but we do make mistakes and we don't always think clearly. and we can be guilty of that too. But hopefully you can from this see that how loving our neighbours as ourselves and in everything do to others as you would have them do to you may come about from empathy and compassion. Love your neighbour as yourself. Love does no wrong to a neighbour. Therefore, love is the fulfilling of the law. So reflect on that for a moment. I am going over what we talked about in the previous slide there, but it is so important that I feel that I have to. So, and then it's not just about us and what people are going through suffering. There's so many different kinds. There is more to it. You know, when Jesus talks about when the Son of Man comes in his glory with the angels, he'll say, he'll obviously say, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you gave me clothing. I was sick and you took care of me. I was in prison and you visited me. And the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And Jesus, the King, will answer them, truly I tell you, as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. And you can see the highlight further down. Truly I tell you, and this is after he's spoken to the ones that didn't do those things. Truly I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. So he has taken it really personal if we don't care for others and take care of others. So, and again, as mentioned before, empathy and compassion. When we see these situations and we imagine what they're going through and how they're feeling, gives rise to compassion and the compassionate action. And when we do that for them, not that we're thinking that we're doing it for Jesus as we do that. We do it for the right reasons. We do it because those in front of us are the ones that need that. So feeling empathy and having compassion on our fellow man is critical. We must make it a part of us and we must become good at it. But how might we deliberately do that? So first of all, there's some roots there. I was very original in that slide. Let the message take root. You may have noticed that I've did not have as much infinite time as I would have liked on getting these slides done, but there we are. So what will you do? This is about this taking root. So the parable of the sower. A sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell on the path and was trampled on, and the birds of the air ate it up. Some fell on the rock, and as it grew up, it withered for lack of moisture. Some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew with it and choked it. And then some fell into good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. As he said this, he called out, let anyone with ears to hear listen. So some fell into good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. Well, out of those options, to my mind, that's the one that sounds best. I can tell you that straight off. And then Jesus explained, now the parable is this, the seed is the word of God. So the commandments and what we've been told. The ones on the path are those who have heard. Then the devil comes and takes away the words from their hearts so that they may not believe and be saved. The ones on the rock are those who, when they hear the word, receive it with joy, but these have no root. They believe only for a while, and in a time of testing fall away. And as for what fell among the thorns, these are the ones who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by the cares and riches and pleasures of life, and their fruit does not mature. Um, and then Jesus explained, now the parable is this, the seed is the word of God. So the commandments and what we've been told. The ones on the path are those who have heard. Then the devil comes and takes away the words from their hearts so that they may not believe and be saved. The ones on the rock are those who, when they hear the word, receive it with joy, but these have no root. They believe only for a while, and in a time of testing fall away. And as for what fell among the thorns, these are the ones who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by the cares and riches and pleasures of life, and their fruit does not mature. to my mind, I think in these, I mean, obviously we've all got our challenges, but there is also a kind of minimum bar with the standard that we live these days. And that there is certainly in the in the in most countries there's a safety net for people, so that they do not go hungry, uh, and they do have their basic needs met. Um, in fact, so that last one in verse 14 is the one that I think is probably the strongest one in our individualistic society these days, and with how we live. So we have many cares and riches and pleasures of life, and there's a real danger that the fruit does not mature because of that. And that one there is one that I think could be very strong among us. But that's me speculating and certainly thinking about myself. Um, but then in verse 15, but as for that in the good soil, these are the ones who, when they hear the word, hold it fast in an honest and good heart and bear fruit with I'll try it again, patient endurance. So you can see that they first of all hear the word and then they hold on to it. So in other words, they don't forget it and they hold on to it in an honest and good heart, right? And with that combination, they bear fruit, but not just by holding it fast in an honest and good heart. They bear fruit with patient endurance. So that suggests to me that it takes time and it does take endurance, which means putting up with various challenges that may come around that require us to be enduring. So keep that in mind. And likewise, Jesus said when he talked about building the house on the rocks or building on the sand, we know that the one who actually hears the words and acts on them, that's the one who's like a man who built his house uh, and laid the foundation deep on the rock. And when the flood rose, the house was fine. It could not shake it because it had been well built. But the opposite of that is the one who hears it and does not act. So this is again, it comes back to the parable of the sower again. It's about hearing and not acting. It's like a man who built his house on the ground without a foundation. And when the river burst against it, immediately it fell, and great was the ruin of that house. So, yes, what will you do, or what do you think you'd like to? Which parts would you like to select from these for yourselves? What makes sense to you, and what might make the positive difference in your life? I can certainly see for myself that, yep, I want to be the seed that fell in the good soil. I want to be that person there where that is tended and grows and stays with me, and through patient endurance and honest and good heart, it bears fruit. I want to be that person. I want to be the person that hears and acts on what is said, and building on that, and that's firm and dependable. So choose well. Are we building our house on the sand? Who do we want to be in that parable of the sower? Um, and yes, hopefully we do want to be the ones who hear the word in the first place, paying that attention and hearing it and holding it fast. So yes, and hopefully I can encourage us all, and I'm speaking to myself too, to resolve to become really good at loving our neighbours, ourselves, and in everything, do to others as you would have them do to you. And that is what the commandments are summing up to. So I could have written a lot more there if I wanted to, but that is what it's coming down to. And to my mind, empathy and compassion are fundamental to that. So what are the benefits of mastering empathy and compassion? I believe that it can help us to wean ourselves off sinful behavior. So, but I'm not excluding prayer for that. I think that we can use every help that we could possibly get. So I'm saying that empathy and compassion together with prayer can help us avoid sinful behaviors by understanding their impact on us. But I'm not going to use it as an excuse that my prayer's not been answered, so I can't do it, because Jesus clearly says, if your eye is causing you to sin, pluck it out. If your hand is causing you to sin, cut it off. He's clearly saying that. So I'm not counting on a miracle to get me out of that. There is work for me to do. There is patient endurance in growing that fruit. So we can avoid thinking about empathy and compassion. We can think about how our sin might impact others. That's part of empathy. So harmful actions and neglect, realizing how hurting others or failing to help affects relationships, can motivate us to change. And empathy helps us to see the consequences of our actions. Negative feelings, recognizing feelings like anger or jealousy can help us understand how they harm relationships. Compassion can replace these feelings with understanding and forgiveness. Disrespect and misuse of influence. Understanding how disrespecting authority or misusing influence harms the community can motivate us to act with integrity and compassion. In fact, not just can, let it, let it impact us like that and motivate us. This is what the empathy and compassion's about, recognizing these things, feeling it and acting in the compassionate way. And that includes changing ourselves. We don't have control over others. We can't change others. They have to change themselves. They have to want to change themselves, and that goes for us too. We have to want to change ourselves. Divisive behaviors. There are things that we can do, that divisive actions that affect community unity, and we might be on the receiving end of that, and that can inspire us to promote support and togetherness. Our stories dictate who we are and who we become, and other people's stories too can do that. And that is through empathy and compassion. So hopefully something really to think about here. And helping others to it can also benefit by helping others to get the help and comfort that they need. Empathy and compassion are crucial in addressing the needs of those around us. And there it comes down to what Jesus said about feeding and clothing and caring for the sick, investing the imprisoned. Um, they're all there. So empathy and compassion can drive us to that too. It can also help with modern issues. Jesus didn't write about, or Jesus didn't seem to be addressing a lot about loneliness and mental illness. I know that there was some things, but a lot of that is a result of the environment that we live in now, where it's a lot more individualistic rather than community focused. And yeah, that's a great shame. So yeah, individualism often overshadows community. And yeah, so community engagement, encourage. So here's some tips that empathy and compassion can provide us. Okay. Encourage participation in community activities that foster connections such as support. Yeah. So these are more in the world, but we are in the world. We are part of the world. We are also quite isolated by ourselves. And Jesus has told us to look after those in need. So are we going to sit in our houses and on our backsides and think, I'm going to change the world from here? Or, and how can you be a shining light? Jesus says you cannot light a light and put it under a bushel. You can't hide that. So it has to be shining for something. And even in our uh, non-Christian communities and what have you, we can be a shining light towards others. In fact, if anything, it's a lot easier to be a shining light because we care about these morals that we've been given from above. And when others don't practice that, we stand out like a sore thumb, but in a more positive way. Not a sore thumb, but we do stand out. We really do shine that light, and people see that and they wonder what's so different about us. And that gives us opportunities to actually witness. And they want to be like us because they can see something right about us. And that's the wonderful thing about the commandments that we have received, is that that's the kind of effect they've got on a broken world. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of other things there. You can see there, modeling behaviors on the list there, leading by example. And I've put in there, highlighted that that's about being a shining light to others, you know. Um, yeah, all of these things. So how do you learn to love our neighbors as ourselves? And this is where um, I introduce something called the 4 stages of competence. Now, this is a psychological model. It it's not saying that it's absolutely 100% reflective of reality, but it's a pretty good approximation. The thing is that with empathy and competence, for example, compassion, empathy and compassion, there are so many ways of doing it and so many ways of getting it wrong. And we are we can be in a blind spot initially, not even aware of how many ways that can be. And to me, it's a lifetime of practice. And this is where the patient endurance comes in, um, to actually master that. So what this model here kind of describes one strand, let's say, of empathy and compassion, one example that we might know about. Um, so it goes from unconscious incompetence. In other words, that's the initial stage. And basically, we don't know that there's a problem. It's like people that didn't have the law, they didn't know that those things were wrong. And before the law came, you know, um, we don't know that what we are doing is good or bad. We may have our own kind of initial inkling. So, for example, we might know that people take revenge when we do certain things to them, you know. So we might stop doing that in the name of the small community, whatever we are part of. Even without laws, you can kind of start making conclusions like that. But before that, there's a kind of unconscious incompetence. You've got to learn these things. So we're unaware of that. We don't know what we don't know, and we can be a bit overconfident. There's an example there. A person might think that they can drive a car without having learned how, you know. Remind me to be not on the road that day. Um, Conscious incompetence, that's the next stage. And that point is, they might just have banged the car into something. They become aware that, hang on, maybe I'm not as good at that as I thought I was going to be. And they realize that they lack certain skills. And they might feel frustrated and or overwhelmed because wait a minute, everything was fine in living in bliss. Um, but yeah, so that's the second stage, kind of becoming aware. And teachers around the table here, they know this. Sergio will know this, and I know Rosalind will know this stuff. This is about learning. Um, and so that's the second stage, the kind of conscious incompetence. The third stage is conscious competence. And that's not easy for me to say. I've struggled all this presentation. So, but conscious competence is really being aware that there are things that you have to do and you know how to do them, but you have to do them slowly because you've not, it's not become second nature yet. You know, the driver might have started lessons, or might even be heading up towards their driving exam, um, but they've not been driving for years. It's not become second nature. They have to concentrate on everything, and it's all a bit stressful, and they might forget checking mirrors and signaling and all these things, but once you drive for a while, you're so used to it, you don't even think about your route home. It just, it's almost taken you on autopilot. Thankfully, it doesn't. Thankfully, you are still doing it. But that's the conscious competence, is that initial having to think about everything as you do it. But that later becomes unconscious competence by this model. Is that you do learn to drive without having to think about it, and you can navigate traffic and change lanes and respond to situations automatically without much thinking. So that's the same with the empathy. We don't know how inconsiderate we might have appeared before uh, we knew that there were certain things that we were completely overlooking. Then we become aware of it and we look into it and we start to try these things and become consciously competent in them. But we have to have patient endurance throughout this to get to the stage of it becoming unconsciously competent. So I thought that was a really useful thing to put in there about the empathy and compassion, um, and you know, rather than losing a limb or losing an eye, actually doing something about the things that we have to deal with. So moving on. So yeah. So, as I mentioned, the four stages of competence can help us become good at understanding, empathizing, and having compassion. They can help us to care for others as Jesus taught, and in dealing with modern society issues like loneliness and poor mental health. So, those were the benefits that I listed earlier. So, knowing that we can indeed change, even as far as not being aware of an issue, through to having mastered the solution. And by thinking about our own and others' experience, we can become more empathetic and compassionate in our families, schools, workplaces, churches, and communities. Whether they're Christian or not, we should be a shining light at all times. Do we take a break from obeying God? We'd better not. And again, I remind us that Jesus has told us that all of the law and the prophets about treating others as you would like them to treat you. So it is what Jesus tells us in Luke 8:15 not to become very good at doing so. And I like to think that it is. So moving on, just looking at time here. Yep, I can talk. So we are in this for the long run, aren't we? We're not looking at just doing this for a short time. We're in this for our lives, and we are hoping that those skills that, who's to say that in the kingdom that we're not having to rely on where we've got to, and I don't know, but certainly in our lifetime we want to secure a place in the kingdom. And not only that, we just want to do the right thing. At least that's how I think about it. what God has commanded us through Jesus and through the prophets and so on. It's all about doing the right thing. And I've noticed that the commandments, they're absolutely not about God just being bigger than us and telling us that he wants it his way or the highway. You know, it's not like that at all. Looking at how the law comes back to loving our neighbours ourselves, in what way is that? Um, well, it'll benefit God in some way, but it's definitely not some selfish remark, you know. He wants the best for us. This is about the right thing and doing the right thing. And he doesn't punish us at every moment for when we do wrong. You know, in fact, Paul says that it's that God wants everyone to come to a knowledge of him and to obedience, and we've got that chance in our lifetime, and others do too. So hopefully we can do that best for ourselves. You know, if you're thinking about a plane, we've got to use that oxygen mask first, as they say, before we do for others, and we do not want to risk our salvation. Um, and strangely enough, if we do what's needed for our salvation by staying in the love of God, uh, funnily enough, we're also doing the right thing by others, because it's about loving our neighbours as ourselves, treating them well. This is what we've been asked to do. So it's that idea of the airplane and taking the mask on first before you help anybody else, it doesn't quite fit, because you are helping everyone else by putting the mask on. You know, it's something to think about. So, yeah. And there are many ways to love our neighbours as ourselves, and there are many ways to get it wrong. And we may not currently know half the ways that we hurt others. And some things may take longer to overcome than others in our lives. And I think that's to be expected. You know, there are many reasons for these things. We all come with different backgrounds and baggage and all of these things, and strengths and weaknesses. And so what's the answer? Well, there's not a magic pill. You know, the important thing is that we keep working at it and do that all of our lives, practicing empathy and compassion, making sure that we don't do to others what somebody's done to us in the negative sense. Um, uh, and if by reflecting on our personal and other people's experience, we can better understand those around us, and create a more compassionate and connected world. This is kingdom stuff. Isn't it beautiful? Can you imagine if everyone did that? Wouldn't that be something? That is kingdom. So, how do we develop empathy and compassion? Now, this is where I've just been doing various research, and it's just more suggestions. And you can take the gist of them and take them as you will. But I would encourage getting involved in both A2K and also other organizations that are helping the poor and so on, and that does put us in contact with others rather than being isolated, and helps us to learn more from others by empathy, and by that we're able to help others too without having gone through those same things ourselves. So that really is a self-feeding mechanism. It's something to think about. So where we are, it's natural that you don't understand what someone is going through it, and it isn't necessarily a lack of empathy. With everyone, there are things that they know about themselves and what they're going through that others don't know. And they keep those things quiet, and there's various reasons for that. And there are things that both they and others see and know. You know, we can see that when people are expressing their feelings, and how they're suffering from what they're going through. Um, and there are some things that others can see that they can't. So that's also a fact, you know. There is that we can lend um, to the situation. You know, that's why you get peer reviews and things like that, because others can observe things that we might just be too busy to see in our own lives, or too consumed with what have you, to be aware of. And there are things that neither they or others are aware of. So there are all these things that make things complicated and makes it difficult to get the understanding. Um, and likewise, we've also got different understanding of the world and rules for ourselves. You know, if somebody lies to you or steals from you, they may just think that it's absolute. You know, they might very well think like that. And I can see a few folk thinking, what is Paul teaching you? And I'm certainly not teaching that. It really is about the the standards that we hold ourselves to, and we hold ourselves to the highest standards, the ones that have been handed down from God through Jesus and through the prophets and so on. So you can't you cannot get upset with others that don't have those standards. You can be disappointed that they don't have those standards, but and you can't change others, but you can be a shining light to them, and they can become curious in seeing that. Isn't it strange that that person doesn't just do like the rest of us do? You know, you only live once. Come on, you know, that's how they think. Yet we have got much better in store. So yeah, uh, and you can see there are many factors in putting ourselves in other people's shoes, including our own personal experience and the experiences we've observed from others and been close to. But in any case, empathy can be learned. So here's some ways of growing in empathy. And one is connecting with others. You know, it's easy to assume that everyone thinks and feels the same as you do, but you can obviously see from the last slide that that is not necessarily the case. But even when you know people are different, it can still be surprising when someone offers a perspective that's quite unlike yours. And often we assume that others are just like us, so their behavior can seem puzzling. When you don't know much about someone, it's harder to understand their actions or thoughts, making it difficult to empathize. So you can ask yourself questions, get curious, you know, get curious about other people and get to understand other people and their experiences by asking questions and actively listening. Wasn't that listening thing the first thing when it came to the sower? You got to hear it in the first place. And that's the same goes for getting to understand other people, and being there for other people. So yeah, and you can learn from those that share their experience with you and gain an understanding of what it's like to see the world through a different lens, and what they go through and how they feel and what has helped comfort them and what help they really needed, even if it's on reflection after they've gone through it and they can see clearer. You know, you can learn all these things that can help you to help others by connecting with others. You know, it's no use sitting at home in front of the TV. That's just got to make your eyes square. Um, so experience the world firsthand, very similar, you know. You got to have access to other people's stories and realities, and you got to be there, connected to them to actually be able to be there for them, you know. And there are various things that you can do where you are. I recommend A2K, but there are other things as well that may be more hands-on in your local community. And it's not just people. There's also all sorts, you know, autobiographies and stories and all sorts that you can learn from. Pay attention and take from it what is useful in this respect. Um, and don't spend a moment on the rest. And you can reflect on your own and other people's experience, and that can teach empathy in many different ways, like understanding different perspectives. So recognizing that others have unique experience. Yeah. Noticing the shared challenges and joys that connect us all. Becoming more attuned to your own feelings can help you understand and relate to the emotions of others. Reflecting on past interactions where empathy was lacking can guide you to respond more thoughtfully in the future. Identifying moments when you truly listened improves your ability to actively listen and understand others. Appreciating the struggles and triumphs of others encourages kindness and support. By valuing different viewpoints, you reduce judgment and become more open to others' experiences. Imagining how others might feel in various situations prepares you to respond empathetically in real-life situations. And what do we do with all that? Well, we've got to do both at the same time. We've got to continue learning and pick these things up, just as we are studying the Bible all the time and pick more and more up from there all the time. But where does the rubber hit the road? This is where the rubber hits the road. It's with others and with each other. And that's where these things should be getting put into practice to perfection. Even if it doesn't reach perfection, just keep at it. That patient endurance to bear that fruit, which is from helping others, as Jesus said, visiting in prison, clothing, giving food, and then there's the emotional level thing and the issues with the modern society, being there for others. There are plenty that need the help, and they all count. It's all good fruit, and it allows you to shine your light and be an example for others. You have an audience. So thank you very much for that, guys, and thank you for your patient endurance of my presentation. I hope it was helpful. And yeah, to anybody who's new, please do join us online, and we look forward to seeing you. Thank you.